On behalf of Curating for Culture, I welcome you all to Constructing Personal Archives finale. Before we begin, I would like to remind you all of some essential logistical requirements. The dialogue will be recorded for documentation and dissemination purposes. We hope that we have your consent for the same. All participants are requested to keep their handles on mute to avoid any disturbance in the recording. Please avoid keeping your web WhatsApp on or mobile phones on sound mode when your handle is unmuted. If it is convenient for you, we request that the participants may keep their videos on during the session. The Google Meet link is only for registered users and should not be shared with any other person without our knowledge. Questions will be collected via the chat only after presentations are over. In case you are facing any troubles connecting, please find the live stream on the Facebook page of Curating for Culture. Curating for Culture has emerged out of collaborations and initiatives explored by Ishita Shah across various cities and projects ranging across different disciplines. We are a collective of many diverse individuals passionate about cultural issues, and creativity is a hack. I would now request Ishita to tell us more about today's program, the upcoming plans, and introduce the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Wallaby, for that warm welcome and introductions. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and supporting us from across the world. We are really stoked about this, especially this being the first edition of Constructing Personal Archives program and its finale, hosted by Curating for Culture. So I'm just going to take 2 minutes to introduce or tell you a little bit about what happened in Constructing Personal Archives, where we are going from here, and then hand it over to the program moderator, the session moderator. Constructing Personal Archives 2020 was envisaged as a 4-month-long incubation program. And this happened because of pandemic. This happened because we sort of did precursor 3 workshops where one was thinking about what are people doing sitting at home, how are they connecting with their families, are they able to connect or not, and what could we do with these family histories. And since there is a background in archiving for last 10 years, one said, okay, let's archive family histories. And those workshops always stopped at 10-15 days, and that stopped at proposal making. And that feedback led us to imagining something which is a little longer, where it doesn't remain just a proposal, but actually turns into a project. So after this successful run from September to December 2020, we also realized that this has been first of its kind incubation program. And we collectively agreed to curate this public showcase. So what has happened over the last 2 months is twofold exercise. The participants have basically been engaging with their own archive because they went through the 4 months of the workshop, or the workshopping, if that's even a word. And they worked with their own processes to meet the individual target which they had, but they also continue to work with us to co-curate this collective expression, which is the finale. And in parallel, what we were doing is trying to give it a more tangible form, because this entire experience has been digital. And Vallavi and I came up with this idea of what if there was a publication, but not just another publication. So what does it look like, the archival compendium? I'm going to quickly show you a clip and then talk to you about it. Okay. Right. So that was about the compendium, what it looks like. And the idea is basically to sort of allow a reader to curate their own content, their own thematic, their own understanding of what this program is. We surely have our own structure, and that is why the pages are arranged just like an archivist would do. And then when you leave the box open to the researcher, they are allowed to interpret and look at the content themselves. It happens to be curating for culture's first self-published work. We are very excited about it, and also the form it has taken, which speaks for the experiences of the people, the projects, and the program over, or rather, amidst a pandemic. So we're very excited about this endeavor. We also want to keep doing more of these self-funded, free public access initiatives. And on that note, I would like to share with you that we have a crowdfunding campaign going on. So if you would like to support us in any way, that's the way to do it. And that crowdfunding campaign also can lead you to getting a copy or two of the compendium. So you can read the slabs to understand better. So that was a little from our end to tell you about the time travel. And I'm now going to move on to introducing you to and inviting our third moderator and co-curator, Anuja Gosalkar. Before I introduce her, just a rundown of what the evening will look like. We have 5 projects being discussed today, and they will all present for about 15 minutes. And then that will leave us with about 40-45 minutes of a discussion moderated by Anuja and open to the audience. Each of her moderators and curators, including Anuja, they've set out a thematic for why these projects are coming together and what this session is supposed to sort of provoke us to talk about. So Anuja will start with that context laying. Without further ado, Anuja Gosalkar is the founder of Drama Queen, a documentary theatre company evolving a unique form of theatre in India since 2015. Her practice focuses on personal histories, archival absences, and blurring the hierarchies between audience and performer to extend the idea of theatre to create audacious work. Iterations around form and process, models of social media, social bracket, unbracket media, sites, technologies, reclaiming narratives on gender and intimacy are critical to her performance making and pedagogy. As artist in residence at Art Lab Nesta, Sweden, she created her debut show, Lady Anandi, which traveled extensively across India and showcased independently in Berlin and Stockholm. So we couldn't have asked for a better start to day 2 than Anuja herself and her work and her way of looking at the archives. Thank you, Anuja, for accepting our invitation. Over to you.
Thank you, Ishita. And again, congratulations to you and Vallabi and all the people who participated in this wonderful program. I think what you've done over the last 1 year is extremely vital in talking about history, in talking about documentation. So it's a project after my own heart. So congratulations. Just to contextualize this evening a little bit, this session is called Stories Wandering Out. This line or this phrase is taken from a poem called The Story Around the Corner by Naomi Shihab. And the line goes, stories wandering out, having their own free lives. So what will we see in this session? This session will look at the fleeting, evolving nature of archives. Outside the conventional modes of preservation, how do objects, histories, ephemera, wander out into the world? What happens to archival material once they go outside the archival home, let's say, once the public is open to them? What are the multi-layered destinies, futures of archives and their materials? That's really, in very brief, what we want to frame this conversation as. And as we hear the presentations, the complexity of disseminating stories and what happens to the stories that we carefully gather and curate, what is the life and their futures outside of our homes is what we will see. And I will be inviting 5 archivists to present, and let's get straight into it. Our first presenter for the evening is Avantika. Avantika is a journalist, she's a researcher, an oral historian, and has a particular interest in recording narratives of trauma, violence, memory, and personal life histories. And there's no wonder she's part of this presentation, because she thinks of herself as a storyteller. Given the wide scale of her interests, she's worked on projects ranging from the 1947 partition archive to recording narratives of tsunami survivors in Indonesia. She's also been involved in projects around mental health, gender, trauma, and violence in particular. She's also currently recording the histories in the form of biographies and digital narratives. Alongside, she's engaged in working on a project analyzing, I think, extremely vitally, what are the moral costs of war. And as if all of this wasn't enough, Avantika is a volunteer at Samaritans Mumbai, a suicide prevention helpline. And the project she's presenting is called Dear Grandfather, the Story of Your Absence. Avantika, I hand it to you. I will start the clock at 15 minutes. So looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you so much. I was eagerly waiting for the evening to start, and I have a nice, at least I think, a nice audio that I prepared for all of us to have just an idea of what the project is going to look like. But I'll briefly go through one presentation very quickly in a minute or two, just so that you have an image of who my grandfather was. So I'm going to start presenting. So I'm going to run through it very quickly because in the audio you'll get to hear more narrative or a story of what this project is really about. Here is a picture of my grandfather and my grandmother, and the project is called Dear Grandfather, the Story of Your Absence. And that's primarily because I practically never met my grandfather. I mean, he passed away when I was not even a year old. And this journey is about finding him, who he was, why he lived the way he lived, what is it that he has passed down to me. And the entire project is a lot of questioning that I've carried with myself for the last 20, 25 years. I've spent a lot of time with my grandmother, and hence I feel she's an essential part of the project because I've learned everything about my grandfather through my grandmother. Not through beautiful stories of where she would sit and tell me about him, but through her cries and shrills. And, she would get up in the middle of the night and question why he died before her. So this is the way I've been introduced to him, and hence the entire project is a search of who he was and why am I connected to him. He passed away when I was just a year old. Daddy, we all called him Daddy. He was a writer, a philosopher, a poet. He was a lover of English literature, a lover of Urdu, and he used to perform Shakespeare in form of Urdu ghazals as well. That's what some of his students told me. I've been hearing of his stories ever since my childhood, all sorts of stories, and I decided to sort of collect all the emotions that have been piling up on me for all these years. And when I came across curating for culture and the fact that it could give me a platform to curate all of it and give it a form of story, I realized that this is also a chance for me to just let it out, to let my baggage out in some way. So the entire project is not just about life and death, but there are definitely stories about family history, the trauma it leaves behind, the baggage we all carry, and what do relationships do to us. I before while we were doing the workshop, I had this idea that an archive can only be a physical space or a website at max. But with Anuja, I realized that an archive is in me. I am the holder of his story, and hence I thought that the an audio narrative would be the best way to let it out. And hence, this archive, this project, is not just about collecting his stories in physical form, but about narrating it in form of a performance that will come out as an audio essay in the long term. Also, we have a house that was bought by Daddy in Shimla, and he has written a poetry around it. I am thinking in the larger context to put a museum around it and to tell the story of that house and the trauma that that house has itself seen. The project particularly talks about memory, family history, baggage, philosophical questions around why we become the people we become. What does death and healing really mean? Primary question is, do we really move on from people who leave our lives? Uh, Maybe we don't, because that's how I'm coming back to him time and again. I'm sorry for the rush, but because the audio has a lot of it, I'm going to sort of go ahead. The focus is personal archiving, storytelling, and communication. I feel there's this thread between him and me, which will be explored in this audio essay. The first image is of grandma and daddy. The middle image is of his house in Bhatinda, where he was born. 25 years later, I'd gone to his place, and that's when I started doing oral history interviews. And this is how his house looked after more than 30 years. The last image is of grandpa and me. That's him holding me in his arms. That's the only picture I have of us together. And hence, I feel it's really important. That's my grandmother and my brother. Grandma is important because she was the one who introduced, like I told before. So, the idea of archiving is through objects, through looking at old photographs, through looking at writings. The third picture that you can see is of these stacks of papers that I found of my grandfather, where he's published all sorts of writings. The middle picture is of a sari of my grandmother and her glasses. I feel she's an essential part, and hence all her objects would be archived. The first picture is of an old family photograph that he received as a gift. Apart from these, I have voice memos, old objects. All of them would be put up. Example could be an object like in this cassette that I found. This was also the first time I heard my grandfather's voice. This is in 2017. I've widely used his voice in the audio essay that I'll show you. And the next part is also, the project is also about storytelling and juxtaposing all his questions. He's written, I feel that this entire quest is about asking things from him. And hence, on one hand, while I have a material which tells me what he was thinking, on the other hand, and I have questions to him, which are like, dear daddy, how would it be if you continued to live instead of grandmother? Would I then be on a quest to find her? Would you too have cried over her untimely death? Or we would have engaged in different questions in the middle of every night. I wonder how that would have been. So it's basically writing to him at this stage. The idea is also to discover my family roots. These are some old photographs that I have. My grandfather is on the right, top right. And in this picture is his father and his grandfather also. So these all sorts of photographs would be put up later, and everything has a story to tell. So I'll move on to the audio that I have for a better.
लोग कहते हैं कुछ तो कहिए कि लोग कहते हैं आज गालिब गजब सराहना हुआ. The day I heard my grandfather's voice for the first time was also the day my father finally began grieving over Daddy's unforeseen death. It was on the warm evening of 24th June 2017 in Shimla, exactly 23 years and 20 days later, in the same house, when my family recalled the eventful life and death of my grandfather. Mum found an old recorded cassette of him singing a Persian poetry, and as we all heard Daddy sing, we broke into tears. While Mum kept fidgeting with the tape recorder that played the cassette, I felt like my father was transported to a different world. Mum's constant fidget was to keep him here, present, she told me later. As Daddy sang verses of Urdu ghazals, we all wept to our loss as a family, and our loss as individuals. देखता रहूं, मुझको तो है यही आवाज़, मुझको तो है यही जन्म, बस इसी कागज पर है। तू मेरे सामने रहे, तू मेरे सामने रहे, मैं तुझे देखता रहूं, मैं तुझे देखता रहूं, मैं तुझे देखता।
My grandfather died when I was just over a year old. I have a photograph of him holding me in his thin arms. I am wearing a pink silk frock whose long strings are gently falling on the left of his elbow. He is looking at me, gently, smilingly. I seldom pull that photograph from our 26-year-old tattered album. Is he trying to say something? I wonder. My grandfather died when I was at the brink of celebrating my first birthday in April 1994. It was sudden, within the last week of the hot month of June. I'm told that those 7 days were pretty difficult because of his illness. The last day was particularly full of cuss words, shrieks, and screams at the hospital ward where he was admitted. Our family members dispute the reason for his illness. Mom says it was brain fever. Uncle believes that the disease remained undiagnosed. The last word everyone heard from him was Sumitra, the name of my broad shouldered, dark grandmother. She sat beside him, hoping he wouldn't let her become a widow at 52. My father tells me that he was alone in the hospital's elevator, returning from a quick smoke when the doctor broke the news of his father's death to the family. I have grown up listening to several stories of my grandfather's life, his failures, his distinct life choices, and ignorance for not prioritizing a strong financial status. There hasn't been a moment in the past when his name was not brought up in a family get together. Daddy, as everyone called him, had some anecdote of his life that even today stirs up an interesting conversation. You know, we all would have been in London if he had called your grandmother there. But of course, we don't understand what was in his head that he decided to come back to India and settle in this small hill town, Shimla. My uncle would tell us kids. Hearing of my grandfather's seemingly horrible life choices while I was still in my teens, I began making notes of decisions that I definitely shouldn't and couldn't make in my life. A large part of my childhood was shaped by my family's strong belief that only if daddy's life decisions were a bit different, a great deal of my life would have altered too. I envisioned living in London as my mother spoke of him while oiling my dry hair. We sat on a fleece rug in a narrow cemented veranda, surrounded by pine trees amidst the warm, broken sunlight in the hills of Shimla. The first time I was in awe of my grandfather was when Mom was cleaning his library on her usual Sunday afternoons. By 14 years of age, I knew that Daddy's books were the only legacy he left behind, something few in the family seemed to be drawn towards. Mum withdrew one book from its horizontal pile, blew off the fresh layer of dust, and hesitantly pointed it towards me. The title read, How to Prevent Teenage Pregnancies. I blushed and shied away. After all the body shaming and not finding a boyfriend problems, the last thing I needed was a pregnancy guide by my mother, a teenage gift left behind by my dear grandfather. The next time I thought quite seriously of him was in an examination hall during grade 8th. I wrote an essay on him consciously choosing to give his death a cover, making Daddy suffer from a fatal cancer. In my imagination, I was careful enough to enhance the time we spent together. He recited stories and tucked me to sleep. We took long walks in the dense forest on rainy days. He made me fall in love with eerie silence of the woods near the Jakku temple. I watched him practice yoga. He dropped me to school every morning. And when I reached home, we essentially ate kheera raita. On his deathbed, I held his cold hand, felt its dry touch, noted the warmth of his forehead sweat, and heard faint wheezes of his nostrils. In the past couple of years, the idea of discovering my dead grandfather has eventually led me to the discovery of my own family history. In many ways, it has brought forth the trauma and baggage that my family members continue to carry or have carried as part of our family's lineage. Having had extensive conversations with my family, near and distant, and questioning myself at various points, I am only slowly beginning to see how generational baggage has tremendously shaped our lives. This archive is aiming to be a deep account of the impact of my family history on me and my family members. I question its role in our lives, how it has molded us into the people we have become, and defined our perspective of the world around us. I try to understand how it has shaped the relationship between me and my father. How has it affected my mother, who was already carrying the baggage of her own family history before her marriage? I wonder if my grandmother was even aware of its silent impact on her.
वही रात याद आती है, बात पर बात याद आती है, हाय क्या चीज थी जवानी भी, अब तो दिन रात याद आती है। हम लोग यहाँ बैठ के बीच में हम सदा ही धर्म का पालन करेंगे। हो गया? हम सदा ही पाप से बच के रहेंगे, हम न गंदी बात बोलेंगे कभी, हम न कड़वी बात बोलेंगे कभी, हम सदा ही
In the process of knowing more about my grandfather, I am learning different facets of the relationship between my father and grandfather. In one of our conversations, my father recalled the day he lost Daddy. The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. We were at the hospital ward. He was losing consciousness. I had never seen him this agitated. As I looked at him, lying uncomfortably on the bed, chained by the IV drips, all I could imagine was me and my father walking up the hill. I must have been in grade 5 or 6, and those days we had to take a long walk around the hill to reach a house in Shimla. Whenever I felt tired and asked him to stop, Daddy narrated Robert Frost's poem. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. That afternoon, I somewhere knew that Daddy would die soon. I also knew that he wouldn't die so soon. Standing close to him, I leaned towards his ear and whispered the same poetry of Robert Frost. I think I was in my late 30s by then, and all these years, this poetry had kept me going. In that moment, being so close to his nostrils and hearing his uneasy breaths, I don't know why, no matter how unrealistic it may sound, all I hoped was this poetry to do its magic. I knew poetry was like an oxygen mask for Daddy, and all I wanted in that moment was for him to keep going on. When I was a kid, Daddy told me that he wouldn't die like everyone else. He said that he will leave his body at his own command. In that dingy hospital room, hearing my mother shout at him, making all efforts to bring him back to consciousness, all I could see was Daddy and me walking up the hill. The singing of Robert Frost's poem overpowered the shrills and cries of my mother. It all felt silent. I had lost my father. But in no moment from then till now have I grieved fully over his death. He hasn't left me entirely. Does anyone leave anyone entirely?
Thank you for that, Avantika. And sorry about having to keep time in the middle of such a personal project. But thank you so much. And I think this segues quite seamlessly into our next project that is titled "Weaving Together a Different Music." I, for one, can't wait to hear this other kind of music that Niharika is about to present to us. Niharika is an architect. She's an independent researcher and writer based in Ahmedabad and is currently involved in museums and cultural mapping projects such as Smritivan Earthquake Museum, the I Discover Maps, and the Sahapedia Museum of India. Her interests are in history and material culture, and that has led her to write for Museum of Material Memory and document her grandmother's objects and stories. Apart from travel writing and urban sketching, she also enjoys discovering narratives in places and people around her, and is very easily lured by chai and good conversation. Niharika, me too. Just make it coffee and good conversation. So yeah, let's hear your different music. Over to you, Niharika.
Thank you, Anuja. Thank you so much, everyone, for holding this space. I am going to move to the presentation directly. Sorry about that, my dog is. So, weaving together a different music. It's the beginning of an ongoing archival project on the lives of Pandit Brijbhushan Kabra and Kamla Kabra, my grandparents-in-law. It began with an open cupboard in Dadi's painting studio over a year ago, which has not only her painting material, but also all kinds of objects and photos she's collected over the years. I got married just over a year ago, and hence I came in contact with Dadi quite recently. And apart from being my grandmother in law, I have found a friend in her. We both share a love for collecting objects, keepsakes, and history. And she's the kind of collector I hope to grow up into. So Daddu and Dadi, as I call them, and their life of constant learning, artistic practice, enriching and drawing from each other. I'd like to briefly introduce Pandit Brijbhushan Kabra. He passed away in 2018, and I never had the opportunity to meet him in person. And even though I'm studying their lives now, writing this bio on this slide was the most difficult thing to do. How do you explain a life in words? I'll try to give you a quick introduction. Panditji was born in Jodhpur to Shah Govardhanlal Kabra in a family of music patrons and educationists. And he grew up listening to all the great classical musicians. They were familiar names and faces around the house. His elder brother, Damodar Lal Kabra, was a sarod player, and he was training under Ustad Ali Akbar Khan. But Daddu never intended to learn music, and he trained as a geologist and decided to take over the family business in Ahmedabad. He chanced upon an acoustic guitar one day, and this was a completely new instrument. This was a time when the guitar was not used to play classical music at all. So from here began his journey of innovation. His father, who was also a sitar player, he challenged him if he could play Hindustani ragas or Hindustani music on this new instrument and make it acceptable to his house and to his legacy. With a few modifications, he worked intensely on it, and he could achieve a great range of music from the guitar. He went on to produce best-selling albums and became a pioneer almost by serendipity. And he introduced the Indian classical slide guitar into the pantheon of music, and the rest is history. Kamla Devi Kabra, extremely agile, perfectionist, and a constant learner, our Dadi. She was born in a small town of Jaswantgarh in the Tapadia family home. Although she was born in a progressive Marwari household, her father was a philanthropist and education reformer. She couldn't study beyond class 5 as there was no school in her village. But she learned weaving, embroidery, and stitched her own clothes in the large family angan while she was a child. At a young age, she was married to Brijbhushan Kabra and moved to Jodhpur, a big city, and had to relearn the ways of life. Here, she was encouraged to hone her natural talent in the arts by her father-in-law, who saw a skill in her hands. Soon, she moved to Ahmedabad with Panditji, where she began embroidering kurtas for his performances as he began playing for more public concerts. Little known fact is that she also learned the basics of classical music as a tanpura player, as you can see on the top right, and she accompanied Dadu on stage sometimes. After her domestic responsibilities were over, she returned to the canvas again and began experimenting. And here too, by serendipity, she intuitively developed a technique of painting with chipped glass. She went on to master the technique and has made over 100 paintings, which we will further see. So, since Dadi is the holder of memories and objects now, and I have access to her, the story themes emerging out of the conversations with her too are from her lens. So her life in Jodhpur and Ahmedabad from last century, of which she has these peculiar objects and keepsakes, which also inform the context of women and their work in the Marwadi domestic space. Her life alongside a master musician, seeing the entire journey of discovery through mastery of the guitar, as well as his other pursuits in business and poetry. And her own life as an emerging artist, uncovering talents and creating complex works of art. So these are the themes of stories that I continue to learn and glean from Dadi. But what propelled me to create this archive formally was this question. How do I remember someone I've never met? And how do I know them through their music and other expressions? And this is a rare recording of the rag Bihag performed by Dadu. So I began by looking through objects and the wonderment of found objects, right? So one after the other, I was flooded with a large range of objects. essentially remnants from a life of music, art, and travel. They range from instruments to clothing to obscure objects such as this 100-year-old lace crimper, which Dadi brought back from Rajasthan, and it belonged to her Dadi. Also, personal letters that I'm uncomfortable to read fully, and music albums which we now play on our new LP player. So it is not so much the range of objects, but the sequence in which I discovered them or arrived at them that's interesting. And through these tangible items, I'm extracting the intangible. Also, because of my relationship as a daughter-in-law who arrived later into the family and in the family timeline, I have a certain inherent distance with the object. So it began with these fascinating silk kurtas, hand embroidered by Dadi. And after I first saw them, I began writing about them for the Museum of Material Memory, which is an online museum. And almost intuitively, I began looking for kurtas on the album covers instead of looking for music. Of course, I was familiar with the music, but I could take the liberty to change the focus of what I was looking for some time. And knowing more about the kurtas that Dadi had made, it led me back to Dadi's artistic practice. I saw her paintings hanging around her house. And
पेंटिंग का हमेशा शौक रहा। मेरा शौक देखकर मेरे ससुर जी ने पेंटिंग सिखाने के लिए टीचर रखा। ड्राइंग टीचर वाटर पेंट सिखाते थे, स्केच भी सिखाते थे। इसके साथ साथ मेरे को एम्ब्रॉयडरी का भी बहुत शौक था। तो एम्ब्रॉयडरी का शौक था। काबरा जी के कुर्ते करीबन मैंने 60-70 कुर्तों पर एम्ब्रॉयडरी की। जाकिर हुसैन, अल्लाह रखा साहब, शिव कुमार जी, संतूर वादिक के भी कुर्ते बनाए।
And so that was Dadi talking about her artistic practice. And just 6 months ago, we discovered Dadu's very first modified guitar in the attic. And I heard his voice in a documentary for the first time, talking about how he found the guitar and how it came to be.
Once, while I was in Bombay and in the evening, the place which is known as Kala Ghoda in Bombay, the square, there was a music shop and a guitar was hanging outside. Suddenly I had a thought in my mind that why shouldn't I take up this instrument? And it was looking so lonely hanging outside there, as if it needed some company, and I also needed it. So I entered the shop. But I don't know, but it's something strange. This time that we had to meet, I thought that I'd give my family a surprise. And I brought it to Jodhpur, my family house, in the church surroundings, where always classical music has sounded from every corner of the house.
And after this, in a musician's archive, one would hope to find notations, music notes, song diaries. But I never found them, and I haven't found them still. And I learned that this was because Dadu had photographic memory, and he never wrote any notes. He would listen, compose, and memorize. But instead, what I did find were his published book of poems written in Hindi. And these gave me a glimpse of his life beyond music. So more questions that I'm confronted with. How did the discovery of a sound, an image, or an object not just change Dadu's life, but also motivated Dadi to find her own artistic voice? How do people remember him as beyond a musician, as he was perhaps the only musician at the time who also was involved in business and philanthropy? Are there any other women in the family who practiced similar embroidery? Has there been a borrowing or a give and take of ideas and embroidering within the domestic space? This image in the background is Dadi's notebook, that Daddu had hidden from her. These are her notations when she was learning music with him very initially. So interestingly, this process has been of objects being found by me or objects finding me. And this is an ongoing process of extracting stories from these objects, sorting and classifying them appropriately. As you can see in the picture, I've begun to classify ephemera and letters and other papers. And most interestingly, looking for references within the object. For instance, a music album cover holds all sorts of information about its designers, writers, and where it was printed, which led to more research on the mentioned album designers, music critics, and printing processes. So the larger culture of design and performance is slowly beginning to be unraveled. Through this process, I arrived at the themes, tags, or threads that the archive must acknowledge, in whatever form the archive might take. Without this, it would not only be incomplete, but also unfair. So, of course, music and artistic practice and the journeys from discovery, innovation, and mastery, but also conflict as to what it means to be playing Indian music on a non-Indian instrument. Travel and movements of not just people, but also sounds and objects. And certain privilege, which gave access to resources along with a certain social and cultural capital, which made a certain music possible. So from this interconnected web of narrative themes, I'm picking up just one thread today. This is a diagram which has also helped me in constructing a digital portal that we will see further. And these are the following are the characters of this story. The first modified slide guitar, its anatomy and its visuals on album covers. I'm sorry, I'll just explain the diagram quickly. So the first modified slide guitar, the anatomy of the guitar, and glimpses of it within album covers. And the first album that was produced by this guitar, which is Call of the Valley, the origin story of the guitar, connected to Panditji's biography, and then Call of the Valley. There are associated artists, their stories, and their archival photos. Dadi's embroidered kurtas and motifs have found their way on album covers and in concert photographs. And then these embroidered kurtas in turn inform Dadi's larger artistic practice. And hence the title of the project, Weaving Together a Different Music. The kurtas woven by her were what he wore while playing his music. So these are the these are the characters in brief. The guitar, which we recently polished and got repaired. And this led to an intense musical dialogue with other musicians he collaborated with.
She was playing the santoor, which was also for the first time, and then we started playing the duet together. Because the thing is, what is missing in my instrument is there in his instrument, and what is missing in his instrument is in this instrument. Because there he can't slide from one note to another, and I can't jump from one note to another. So one night while we had played a concert in Gwalior, and a lot of people saying, it's so wonderful when these two instruments are playing like two lovers talking to each other. And just to hear it is wonderful. So I was just lying down. I said, Shiv, why not make something or something which has a theme of these two as lovers and talking to each other and make some expression.
So this was from Daddu's documentary called The Guitar Odyssey. And this association with other artists led to the beginning of Call of the Valley, the first album, which went platinum. And it's one of the best-selling records of Hindustani music and set forth a new way of producing music. This collaboration transformed both their lives because Shiv Kumar Sharma ji too was looking to revolutionize the santoor and this led to a lifelong friendship. This is a small clipping from The Call of the Valley. So this lifelong association is also seen through correspondence that I've found between Shiv Kumar Sharma ji, Rais Khan Saab, Pandit Jasraj, and others. And it speaks of possibly a different sort of artistic camaraderie from another time. This also gave me clues of names of people, dates, and objects. This image on the right is significant because this image is from the platinum disc ceremony of Call of the Valley, where all the artists are seen with their families. And Daddu is wearing this green kurta, which you see on the right, garlanded by roses and hand woven by Dadi. This leads us to Dadi's artistic practice, her replica of the Call of the Valley album cover in cut glass, and her other stunning work and her artistic process, along with her own collection of ephemera and invites from exhibitions and media coverage. So with all of this material, there were a few larger goals, but basically the idea was to create a digital portal where all this material of varying interest can be accessed and used by people interested in music and, of course, family. And thanks to Ishita, I was almost pushed into digitizing things and attempting to create a digital portal. It is very much a work in progress, so please pardon any glitches. And yeah, so what I'm most interested here, one second. This is the anatomy of the first guitar. And a lot of other recordings and rare recordings that can be accessed slowly. But what I'm most interested in is creating interrelationships between music. For instance, the music albums, like I said, hold so much information about their designers, where they were printed, who did the photography. So for instance, you can see I've done a bit of background research on people who were involved in producing these albums. For instance, Dheeraj Chavda was a very popular photographer in Mumbai. Mohan Wag and Kamal Shedge brought about a revolution in Devanagari typography. They were visual designers. So all of these people were somehow involved and created the culture of music. Similarly, for ephemera, I'm discovering interrelationships between concerts, where Daddu played and which other artists played at the same time. I have also documented kurtas, which Dadi has access to here. I'm in the process of decoding their motifs and interrelating them to the instances where Daddu wore them. For instance, this green kurta he wore on the Lure of the Desert album cover in 1985, again for Call of the Valley, the Platinum Disc ceremony, and then during the Sangeet Natak Academy Award in 2005. And this is the metadata and other information that I will be building. I also hope to have a crowdsourced corner or a collective memory corner here for family, especially to share and connect. Anuja initially spoke of destinies of these objects and where these stories wander out. Recently, the modified guitar was repaired and polished, and my husband and Dadu's grandson Saumitra is seen here. He's beginning to learn the slide guitar. I've also started writing for Museum of Material Memory on objects, and I've also started classifying and digitizing information. And here we are on a spring evening, Dadi and me, now with a woven tapestry of art, music, and serendipity. I'd like to play one last poem written by Dadu in Dadi's voice.
आठवां रंग। जिंदगी के सभी रंग देखे, पर आज एक अलग रंग देखा। रंग तो साथ ही होते हैं, पर ये आठवां रंग पहली बार देखा। उसे रंग तो नहीं कह सकते, उसी तरह जैसे सातवें सुर के बाद कोई आठवां सुर नहीं कह सकते, पर न जाने क्यों जो है ही नहीं वही आठवां स्वर, वही आठवां रंग जीवन की तस्वीर में क्यों रंग भर जाता है।
This is from a book of Dadi's paintings published alongside Dadu's poems in Hindi, and this is a small extract written by their daughter.
Thank you. Thank you, Niharika, so much. I don't know what to say, but like where we were saying earlier that the collector, and you're the holder of this memory, and the collector along with Dadi, the collector doesn't use these objects or for their usefulness, but really he or she or they want to study it and they love them for their scene, the stage of their fate, and the interconnectedness, the intertwined nature of music, the embodiment of wearing a kurta. I think the way performance, archive, weaving are all coming together. I think the stories are wandering out quite powerfully and have legs and have a voice. So thank you for that very, very much. Our next presenter is also working with some kind of intertwined thread, if I may call it, or manja of the patang, as we say. Our next presenter will present his project called Kites, Twines and Other Affairs. And that is Arish Sardar. Arish is a design educator. He's a multidisciplinary creative practitioner and researcher, and currently teaches at the Mariam Dawood School of Visual Arts and Design at Beacon House National University, Lahore. Arish has worked as a communication designer and developed websites for many internationally acclaimed artists and educators alongside his own teaching. So Arish, we're willing to fly with you and celebrate Basant. Basant, if you please.
Right. Thank you, Anuja. Thank you much. And thank you, everyone, for taking time out, being there, and listening all these stories. Okay, so let me start presenting my presentation. First of all, if you, in fact, I would like to say that who am I in terms of this project, this particular project? In fact, I developed a special interest understanding the cultures, subcultures, even countercultures, particularly in recent years. Around me, whether I lived here, whether I lived in Europe, wherever. In fact, I developed a special interest, and I just tried my level best to get gain some knowledge pools, in fact, which resolved my quests. Firstly, though initiating new ideas, new quests, always. I found the process of knowledge gain and dissemination and disseminating those knowledge pools using some sort of curatorial exercises, very loose kind of curatorial exercises, whether in the form of mind maps, whether in the form of like loose sequence of text, piece of text, or visuals, some real, some imaginary. So if I may, in fact, like, because when I was looking at this topic, and I thought that, like, opted for the research of this important visual and material culture, which is missing. I won't say altogether, but somehow it is missing because of the blanket ban, which government imposed, I think, like 15 years ago. So what I'm saying, what I'm like, phantasmagoria or phantasmagoric tales, in fact, which, because these images help me to connect the past and the present, right? I don't know about the future, in fact, like, and I'm not proposing any future, any design solution here, but somehow it's kind of like it's kind of like a humble effort, in fact, to connect, to learn from the past in the form of archives. If you allow me to read that what I'm doing here, so it could clear out the, like, why this particular topic made sense to me, what intrigued me. So this archival project seeks to comprehend the connotation, implications, and challenges of an important cultural festival known as Basant, which used to be celebrated in Lahore, old city, walled city, Lahore, months or suburbia of it. The visual and textual monologue attempts to collect and highlight the visual material and performative references around kites, twines, and the politics of it. Various sociological concerns will be discussed in this project, from the opposition of it by a few cliques as a non-Muslim festival, the artistic practices based on vivid colors and interesting shapes, sizes of kites, the imposed blanket ban due to the casualties, road accidents, the sufferings of the kites, twine makers, vendors, other stakeholders shown through an unreleased film, a powerful theatrical production, and few other graphic novels, which I'll be presenting later on in my presentation. So a liaison of various guide associations with the government over reducing safe Basant will be discussed, and much more in between the lines. And
Arish,
yeah, sure,
sorry.
sure.
Do you want to? Would you want to increase the resolution? Because we are right now seeing only a part of, I mean, very reduced version of your presentation.
Is it clear
You,
now?
you can go a little bit more, I think. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is perfect. Yes.
Is it readable and legible? All right. Okay. Right. So this image I found from a source, one of the collector, Yasin, who posted this on Facebook on his page, and I spoke to him. I was like, I thought, like, this is a very interesting image. So this is called Patangwala, Lahore, 1920, right before partition. Then when I went, because, like, this was a new topic for me as a research project. Of course, like, I was born and bred in Lahore. I thoroughly enjoyed this culture. Like, when the Basant used to happen, we used to go to old Lahore city, Lahore old wall city, and then used to enjoy like others. In fact, like, it's part of my bloodstream. In fact, so when I learned by looking at this is in Punjabi, in Urdu, there is an expression called basant pala udant. And the best English phrase I could come up with, the English, somehow the winter glooms, spring blooms. Uh, uh, like keeping the rhyme. Whether I'm successful in it or not, but somehow, so this is the digital imaging. In fact, I just took few images and just sandwiched them using like a Photoshop. So people of Lahore, old wall city, rejoicing on set of spring by indulging in kite flying on their rooftops. Few of historic accounts, what history tells. So if I go back to 1253, 1325 AD, where Nizamuddin Aulia and Amir Khusro, uh, we find these historic accounts everywhere. And I looked into different articles, different kind of books, and then took few of the sentences which I thought would work. So Amir Khusro wrote several poems about Basant, the pre-Islamic Punjabi South Asian Hindu festival celebrating the arrival of spring by flying kites, wearing yellow, carrying yellow flowers. A legend goes that Amir Khusro's sheikh, Murshid Nizamuddin Aulia, was mourning the death of his nephew when Amir Khusro came up with the whole Basant procession to cheer him up. Delhi's Nizamuddin Aulia's Dargah becomes abuzz with activity as devotees embraced the color yellow through various forms to celebrate the spring festival of Basant Panchami every year as winter recedes. This festival, which is also popularly known as Sufi Basant, dates back to the 12th century when celebrated poet Amir Khusro dedicated his Songs of Spring to his Khwaja spiritual master, Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia. And then this celebration is 750-year-old tradition. People from all religions come here to celebrate this festival. Special Qawwali programs are organized. And then the most important information is that this festival was first introduced by the Qutb Shahi dynasty about 5 centuries ago. Their successors, the Asif Jahi rulers, carried on with the tradition till 1948. I would read this very famous poem, Sakul Ban, the yellow flower. Literally, it means the yellow flower. The yellow flower is blooming in every field. Mango buds are clicking open, other flowers too. The koil chirps from branch to branch, and the maiden tries on her makeup. The gardener girls have brought bouquets, colorful flowers of all kinds, in hands everyone's bringing, but the color lover who had promised to come to Nizamuddin's house in spring hasn't turned up. It's been years. The yellow flower is blooming in every field. This poem, in fact, uh, has been sung since then. In fact, in recent times, a beautiful composition by Sufi poet Amir Khusro and sung in equally amazing way by Varsi brothers, Hyderabad-based Varsi brothers, describing the beauty of Sarson field and the spring season. Then Sahar Raza Khan, she sang it beautifully. Then Professor Subandhu Ghosh, trained in Hindustani classical music, renders Amir Khusro's Basant song Sakal Ban Phool Rahi Sarson. This performance is part of his ongoing program called Secular Traditions in Indian Music and Poetry. And then Ustad Bahauddin sang quite a number of full-length qawwalis in Mahfil's Urs, including this one. And then the very recent video, which featuring which featured Bishabi, and there's a band called Mughal Funk, and they did a wonderful job. In fact, giving it very kind of modern look. So musical group Mughal Funk's latest video, Sakalban Bhul Rahi Sarson, featuring Misha Shafi's powerful vocals and kaleidoscopic segments, is here as the cherry on top on this musical December. And these are the video stills which I took out from that video. Then the festival, Basant Panchami, 1450, 1550 AD. These are in fact like just approximate dates. In fact, like whatever the history unfolds itself. In fact, like in various in fact like ways. So. Guru Nanak in center, surrounded by 9 other Sikh gurus and musicians, all wearing rich yellow robes and turbans, sit upon yellow rugs on a red carpeted terrace, celebrating the festival of Basant Panchami. And then this is the painting, which is on sale on Christie's London. I took this image, mentioned that, in fact, it's a beautiful painting. It's a miniature painting. And then there is another one where it shows that Mughals have been custodian too. And then I took this text excerpt from Abdul Halim Sharar's Lucknow book, Lucknow, The Last Phase of an Oriental Culture, New Delhi, Oxford University Press, 2000. And then again, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, according to Kanhaiya Lal's Tarikh-e-Lahore, 1884, on Basant Panchami, Maharaja Ranjit Singh would preside over a huge Basant Darbar. All would be required to dress in yellow Basanti and wear their best jewels. I would just like go to the next few slides. In fact, like I believe that I would be taking more time if I just like keep reading these texts to you. So this is a very interesting image. Flying Kite on a Hill near Walton Castle, 1788, by Samuel Hazinham's Grimm. Ink wash on paper, source British Library online. And in fact, like this text is an excerpt from the thesis report, from the research journal entry, research journal of South Asian Studies by Amjad Pervez, where he talks about the history of Basant. Another interesting image, which is Basant Bahar at Bashir Bagh Palace, 1891. Sayyid Akbar Archives. Basant Bahar, Basant Panchami celebrations at Bashir Bagh Palace in 1891, while Sufi Saint Point Amir Khusro once again. Qutb Shahis made it a royal festival in Hyderabad, still continues as Urdu Sharif Dargah in Old City. And then, like this is another image from travels in India, including Sindh and the Punjab by H.E. Lloyd. A few other images, in fact, like which made sense to me, because like without discussing the paraphernalia, I believe that I won't be able to, in fact, like to reach to the current like scenario. So few, in fact, like novels, somehow few other compositions, and then this is Hari Haran Singh sings the music of Lahore, 2004. Source Sachal Music, and this is what they say about Hari Haran Singh, and they used this as a cultural festival, the manifested, the stipulated way to say, and it's like a few music albums, and then Flying Kite on Rooftop, 1990s. These pictures are from Twitter, from internet. Few sources are known, few sources are unknown. In fact, like, but somehow I tried my level best to cite all of the images and all of the texts which I took. So this is like a wonderful image, looters at Minare, Pakistan, 1990s. And then some international visitors, tourists, before the ban happened. Basant Party on the rooftop in the Walled City 1999. And then few rare images. A rare picture shows the kite flying tournament winning team with trophy here and a patang in the middle. Source Adnan Imran. And then in the olden days, like 1984, 1985, posters look like this. Iqbal Park in Lahore, where few of the masters, few of the ustads, khalifas, and they just decided to start kite association for the very first time.
Arish, terribly sorry to interrupt. We're at 2 more minutes, please. We're at about 17 minutes. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So Mela Patangbazi, Satsala, like 100 years celebration at Iqbal Park, and then there was a story told by Ustad Mia Abdul Wahid, where he would have said, he would have told 300 years of heritage associated with Basant and all that, and all these pictures. And then I went to interview Dr. Ijaz Anwar, who's just like a very prominent artist who painted Lahore with, kites, and he only saw Lahore, and he couldn't imagine after the ban that Lahore would be without kites. So Up in the Air, he produced, this article was first appeared in the news on Sunday on February 2nd, 2020, last year. And it's a well-written article. It explains, all of the history and challenges, implications, and somehow a future solution too. And then where he was just saying, this dispatch is dedicated to my friend Ashad Durrani, who played the lead role of a kite maker in an Ajoka theatre production. This production, which is a theatrical production, and it all talked about a person who used to be a kite maker, but after ban, he couldn't do much. Lo Per Pasand Aayi is a poem by Hafiz Jalandhari and sung by Malka Pukhraj once, and her daughter Taira Sayed. It's a famous. I would say this, if you see this QR code, I would have included these QR codes on every single page of this PDF, because then it'll be turning that PDF into interactive PDF. So either if it's clear on your screens, you can just right now you can scan that through your mobile camera, and it will take you to the actual song, which is there on YouTube. But somehow further afield, I am planning to, in fact, start a portal, a kind of a website, which will have all these videos, audio, all these multimedia content at a single location somewhere. And then if someone is looking to this PDF, then of course they would be able to reach if they wish to. Then there's another important film which was never released, that was said Kites Grounded. Hun ki tera zor ni gudiye. That was in Punjabi, because the director and the producer, Murtaza Ali and Seema Murtaza, produced this film. They thought it has to be in Punjabi, because it had made a unanimous decision that the language should remain Punjabi, something that the people of Lahore will connect to. It's all about a kite maker, a few stills from the video, because it was not released, but somehow they had released the trailer of it. So it's all about a story. They're like a kite maker, and then few other kite
Arish,
makers.
Arish, sorry to be the sorry आपका मांजा काटने के लिए बहुत like sorry पतंग काटने के लिए sorry, but we are at almost 22 minutes. If you can wrap it up, I'm so sorry. And we have two more presenters and a Q&A with a wonderful audience. Sorry.
I'm bad at timekeeping. I'm bad at
Sorry,
it.
yeah,
That's about to finish now. So materiality, geometry, etc., which is another chapter where I would discuss the twine itself, the thickness of it, what happened while what were the reasons, in fact, like when the ban happened and all that. But somehow I thought like this is more to come some other time. Thank you.
Arish, thank you so much, and my apologies, but we also really want to hear, Johan and Richa. Okay, so swiftly moving on, our next project is called Lives of Ephemeral Records. And again, really a project that speaks to our sense of history, architecture, things that cannot be held on to. And really also, Arish, I was struck by, your QR code and how our stories that are wandering out can be tracked by this QR code. So I wonder what Johan's typography can be tracked by. So our next project is going to be presented by Johan. He wears many hats at the intersection of the arts, culture, and history. He has a background in sociology, and he uses this to contextualize the world around him. His interest in archives also stems from his position at the historical dialogue.lk in Sri Lanka. This is aimed at promoting discourses around the topics of memory and history. Johan is also an accomplished pianist and promotes classical chamber music and has many creative collaborations. And in 2020, Johan received a fellowship from the Alliance of Historical Dialogue and Accountability at Columbia University. He enjoys hiking, traveling, and, unsurprisingly, exploring obscure places and facts. Johan, tell us about the lives of ephemeral records, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I be heard? And can you see the screen that I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay. So the ephemeral lives of records. So when preparing for this presentation, I took a few days to contextualize and reflect on my role in bringing this collection of posters, cards, and receipts, what I loosely call ephemera, out of the files and envelopes. Even in choosing a title for this presentation, I reflected on my own fascination of ephemera for a long time. From coming across old newspapers lining cupboards and receipts in old suitcases, I used to wonder about its social significance and what story it would tell. When participating in a masterclass a few years ago on reading the city as text, a photo project I did was titled Exist to Perish, which captured a palimpsest of posters seen on notice boards, which get so thick after posters being pasted over each other that it collapses with its weight and is discarded by the municipal council cleaners later. So I think maybe it wasn't an absolute coincidence that when I came to choose this collection of posters and ephemera and became a guardian of this precious material, that there was a connection. Since I started showing interest in the material and digitizing them, the Akuru Collective has been also thinking of a physical space for the archives with the possibility to display some of the records and the artifacts being digitized and cataloged. Before I continue, I'd like to thank Ishita and Valabi from Curating for Culture for their tireless efforts in getting this workshop off the ground and in connecting us to many practitioners in the field who broadened our perspectives on what archives could look like and the creative possibilities of archives. In addition to the posters, which I will focus today, we are also working on a collection of Vesak greeting cards and hope to present them from an angle of visual culture similar to those essays in Tasvirgar, the digital archive of South Asian popular visual culture. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have imagined that my records would come to life and creatively speak for themselves. So that is precisely how I would present my archives as one of its guardians, thanks to an exercise we did during the workshops of this incubation program. So this is one of my records, and the story starts with a Pali stanza and is titled How I Escaped Death. So hope you're ready for the story. Anicchavat Sankara, Uppada Vayadamino, Uppajitva Nirajiti, Te Sangupa Samo Subho. It's translated as all things are impermanent, they arise and pass away. Having risen, they come to an end, their coming to peace is bliss. Another translation is all things decay. Having been produced from perishable bases, they dissolve and perish. Knowing this truth, live happily. These are the words firmly stamped on my forehead, a constant reminder of the impermanence of life, also marking out the religion of the deceased. I seem to find consolation in this philosophy, but I also wonder how many people actually recall its meaning when they print me, hastily paste me on a lamppost or boundary wall with glue made of wheat and water. Why do I always need to be stuck on a wall in such a careless way, only to wither away a few days later, weathering the monsoon rains and blistering heat that makes my body wrinkle up and fade away, only to be pasted over by a newer record of a more recent death or a shoe sale at Jubilee Hall or something more flashy like a new flavor of chocolate. My life is obliterated in a matter of days. My purpose of existence, to announce a death, I think is a noble one. It notes the birth and death of a person, his or her village, and where and when the final rites would be performed. We never thought of ourselves as particularly attractive. The same old woodblocks used for years, the same old courteous titles of Upasika, meaning devotee or follower of Buddha, were used carelessly, even when they weren't particularly religious. Never did we think that fonts were even modern by any standard. This was the year 2002, and printing technology had been introduced by the missionaries more than 200 years ago. Even though books and newspapers were being printed in more attractive designs and embellishments, our foundry kept running with the wood block letterpress into the early 2000s. I saw the emergence of offset printing and now digital printing and was envious of their fancy features. The most impressive was the impression of the person who had died. What a great idea, I thought. That would make it easier to identify who had died. But of course, in those early years, people lived in a community, and funerals and weddings were community events. With the advent of loudspeakers and three-wheelers, a man would do a circuitous route around the village, announcing the death on a three-wheeler. Even that is considered old-fashioned or quaint. People who call themselves typographers examine the anatomy of my fonts in detail. I blush when they discuss where the weight of the letters are distributed. I feel slightly violated at this extreme examination of my anatomy. But I know they mean well, and I know they really appreciate the vintage look of letters and the conditions of paper. The singular letters are naturally very curvaceous, evolving from a writing on the Ola leaf manuscripts with stylus, because sharp edges could cut through the leaf. Even though the shapes and designs are vintage, people who don't read the script think I'm sexy. The kind of sexiness that matures with age. Well, at my age, you might call it an elegant font. But what the heck? Curves are what define my identity. The other group of people who give me a lot of attention and tender loving care are the people who call themselves archivists. A weird lot to begin with, but definitely a rare breed. To be honest, I love the attention they give me. It's like being treated right like royalty or a rare species and given treatment that a valuable painting might be given. I was taught to expect very little in life. We were told our life was brief, only associated with sad moments in the human life, and would be treated with minimal care. Printed one day, glued to the wall with another, and within a few days, torn and thrown away. I mean, what else were we to expect as ephemera? Now I feel like I'm having an existential crisis with all this careful handling. The archivist handles me gently with their gloves. They're even concerned about the temperature and the humidity I rest in. Can you believe that? My body obviously went through years of fluctuating humidity levels, which make my already fragile body even more brittle. But these guys seem to know how to preserve me and use my life experiences and the people who were involved in creating me and associating me to further enhance their understanding of culture and history. How cool is that? I never thought I would get that kind of prominence. Sometimes I used to think archivists take life too seriously. I mean, do you really need to spend so much effort cataloging and digitizing flimsy pieces of paper that people usually throw away? But what I learned recently, and which is quite fun, is that by archiving my life and putting together snippets of my life together, historians, designers, and many other people can interpret my existence in many different ways. Last week, I also heard them arguing whether I was a record or an artifact. I was keenly listening to their ideas about presenting me on a digital platform. They also wanted to display me at an exhibition where I belong. So that's why the archivists and museologists are trying to claim me now. The second most eventful moment in my life was the digitizing process. The first being my coming into existence in the wood block letterpress. To be really honest, I was excited, but also a little nervous. I was going to be exposed to light and air again after a long time. And I heard that scanning and digitizing can be a delicate process. A careless fold glue stuck on my body could be the end of my authentic self. But the scanning went smoothly, and it was like a luxury hospital with a fancy new MRI scanner. It was dark and scary, but it managed to capture in amazing detail my physical appearance with the signs and fonts, and even the marks of discoloration. Of course, discoloration was never an issue for the rest of us, since we were meant to be ephemeral, fleeting, or brief. But in my case, one of the rare ones that escaped the anticipated lifespan, I have started to discolor due to the humidity and acid. But don't get me wrong, I'm made of chemical compounds, but doing acid just messes you up, particularly if you want to look good and live long. So luckily now I'm housed in an acid-free file, which has made me quite secure and content. So for a lowly piece of paper that was saved by chance by the Tilaka press in the town of Potuhara in Kurunagala, to the potential of being examined, studied, and interpreted by many people in the future. Maybe some people might get the facts wrong. Maybe they might revive a font. Maybe they might even gaze with a nostalgic air about how communities were tight-knit and that funerals were important social rituals. Maybe someone might make me a trendy postcard, a bit insensitive, but families might try to sue them for violating their privacy. Or a researcher in another country might come across this archive and find similarities in community communication strategies. Maybe a paper historian might research the chemical compounds and the root of the imported paper and write a book about trade relations and be famous. Well, my future seems pretty bright, I think. From being stacked away in a cupboard to be thrown away after our press turned into digital printing, to now being treated as a record in an archive, I think that's a significant elevation of status to be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really want to highlight this thread that seems to be going through the 4 presentations of how I escape death, and at the same time how all things are impermanent. I think there seems to be a really exciting sort of complex dichotomy developing. I invite now Richard to present about her archive. And before, I want to read a bit about Richa and her background and how she got here. So let me just pull up her thing. Richa is an alumni of the Film and Television Institute of India. She's a documentary filmmaker. Her film called Nicobar A Long Way, a documentary observing Aboriginal Islanders' identity and resilience in the wake of the tsunami, is one of her notable works. Currently, she's based in Oroville, and Richa directs at the Oroville Film Institute and also works in the Oroville Archives. And her project presentation is titled The Oroville Archives. Over to you, Richa.
Yeah, hi. I'm a bit nervous. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
It's a huge responsibility and a privilege as well out here. Thank you, Ishita, Vallabi, the entire Curating for Cultures team for making this happen. For all the random thoughts and ideas, you know, they are actually being put in place slowly, step by step, brick by brick. So it's actually a momentous occasion for me and for the whole of our team here in the archives. So I have a long presentation, but I'll be quick and precise. I'll try to be. I begin here. So in my presentation, I will first introduce Oroville. I'll introduce the Oroville archives, and then I'll introduce the conceptual presentation of the Oroville as participatory community archive, its principle, potential, and the proposed plan, which is being worked out right now, which was being developed also through the past 6 months, along with the Curating for Cultures program. And then at the end, I'll be presenting select curations and contributions from the community member in form of a catalog and a virtual gallery, and also excerpts from video art installation, Oroville Timelines, which was conceptualized by myself and Ribu, my partner. So yeah, that's what kind of we will be doing. Yeah, there we begin. So incidentally, I think Ishita is a great planner because intuitively she planned the presentation on 28th February, which is also the anniversary of Oroville. So yes, greetings from Oroville to everyone. This is today is the 50th anniversary of Oroville. That was Oroville earlier in 1968 when it was being inaugurated. And this is Oroville now, 2021. That's where we are right now. And we are trying to take you through this. The archive holds the journey of these 52 years. So what is Oroville? Oroville is an international cultural township off the Coromandel coast in Tamil Nadu near Puducherry, an erstwhile French colony in the south of India. Founded on 20th February 1968 by the mother, Mira Alfasa, a French occultist and spiritual collaborator of Sri Aurobindo, an Indian revolutionary and a seer. Conceived as the town of the future, Oroville is dedicated to human unity and transformation of consciousness. Oroville is constituted under the Oroville Foundation Act 1988, an autonomous body under the Ministry of Human Resource Development, Department of Higher Education. So yeah, charmed by the utopian dream, which begins like there should be somewhere on earth a place which no nation could claim as its own. Influenced by the countercultural movement of the 1960s, as radical youth from the West explored the Eastern landscapes and philosophies more and more, Oroville magnetized these free radicals and put them to restore this native land to its futuristic dream, in collaboration with indigenous Tamilians in Tamil Nadu. 50 years of Oroville reflect an almost superhuman effort and idealism, transforming barren land into a lush green forest city, a community which has now over 3,000 people from 59 nationalities. The ideas, acts, motives, and memories are recorded sporadically, mostly by Orovillians themselves, and preserved in the Oroville archives. What we are proposing now is to kind of develop Oroville archives on the lines of participatory community archive. And this is our guiding principle, that archival material when safe in vaults is like collective unconscious. When we open up the material for people to interact with and immerse in it, we unlock its immense potential of influencing the collective consciousness. Interactive participatory archive can thus effectively educate, inspire, and shape our culture. With this guiding principle, we are right now, what our project intends to do is to enhance community participation in the archival processes by means of an interactive digital interface, essentially a website, a WordPress website is what we are developing, that can facilitate interaction with the past by way of viewing and reviewing thematic curations and chronologies, articulation of the present by way of collaborating to create contemporary impressions of Orwell, an invitation to add value to the community archive by way of contributing from personal collections, chronicling events, consolidating social media, or curating/creating thematic/artistic memory installations. I'm aware that we are right now, the program was called, personal archives, constructing personal archives. And I was wondering, where does Orwell come into the picture? Because Orwell is a community. And what I'm trying to do is develop a community archive, But then I realized that how does the community archive really build? How did Orwell archive build so far? It was with the participation of the community people. It was by the contribution of the fragments that were drawn from the personal archives that has built up the community archive what it is now. And that is how the build-up will continue further. So we intend to encourage and assist community members to construct their personal archives. Momentous fragments from these personal archives will in return enrich the greater community archive of Orwell. So it is this overview with which we are working further. So this is an interface of the website which we are developing right now. This is going to be our home page where we'll have home, periodicals, curations, chronologies, and collaborations. Each monthly or fortnightly, we will have certain, small visual curations which will kind of go as carousels out here. So to go in detail, if I click on home, then will be my home page where there will be a note about the mother and Sri Aurobindo, Orwell. But to cut it short, I'll focus primarily right now, which is what we are developing right now, and the work since past 6 months. And further 6 months down is going to continue because it's a huge work to do, is to develop curations on certain specific categories and themes, and to facilitate collaborations within the community with Orwellians and newcomers, and also outside the community with scholars, filmmakers, and other guests, whoever are the supporters or stakeholders within the Orwell scheme of things. So the focus of work right now is developing the curations, thematic curations, and also facilitating the collaborations. That's the focus of work mainly. So there are 10, that was huge kind of sort of, to develop categories and to kind of have, classify material in those categories, to cast them. So all of that is kind of being done right now. We will come to one of our curations eventually in the due course, but this is broadly what we are working at. So we have people, community, integral education, ecology, economy, town development, art and culture, and bioregion are our broad categories under which the entire material is kind of being cast into right now. And collaborations. So basically, we are developing a platform right now which will, for Orwellians, we invite the Orwellians to kind of curate recorded memories of Orwell, to contribute media artifacts, whatever they may have and whatever they may wish to contribute tangible heritage, like if they have any physical artifacts, like, like bricks that they probably used in the construction of the first community, or scarves of the mother, or things like that, artifacts that are of value for the community in terms of its intent and in terms of its organic progressive development of the city. And to tell stories and share memories, to share research papers, most importantly to identify early Orwellians, because there were so many who came and then there were so many who left and came back. So how to identify early Orwellians and identify chronology of events. So this is a call, actually an invitation for community members to participate into this building of an archive, and the website or the interface that we are developing ideally should be able to facilitate that. And then of course we ask or invite other people, to come and contribute to the archival practices in Orwell, to curate archival artworks, undertake research projects, conduct collaborative workshops and seminars, and co-produce content of archival value. So again, this is an invitation, a call, which we will try to facilitate through our interface, digital interface, broadly. So moving on, then of course, our website will have to have information about the mother and Sri Aurobindo, And these will be linked because there is a great deal of very well curated material and very well developed websites. So this particular website can just kind of reroute them to the respective websites where information can be there, and wherever the information is lacking, we can build up to it step by step. That work is also being done under the experts and under the knowledgeable people within the community. And then the third menu, which is, yes, there will be about team, volunteers, and links to other Auroville websites. So yeah, coming back to thematic curations, which is the main focus of the current stage where we are right now, what we are developing. So our curations, whatever our curations will be, so each menu will have a drop-down sub-menu, which is here what you see, reflecting the broad categories for curations. Each broad category can have multiple number of curated recorded memories or thematic albums. Anyone from the community is welcome to curate a thematic album and contribute it to the archives. The archiving team will technically support the community members to make curations. Each album thus contributed will give a unique perspective to the memory, idea, intent, or let's say the physical experience of Auroville, which is totally subjective. Each album will give a unique insight and information about the community, gradually building up a holistic community-driven repository. This will enable and encourage a truly participatory community archive, which is what is the intent, the next step or what we are trying to kind of develop or propose and enable, activate. So how do we do this? How do we kind of make an album? How do we kind of curate? So we are using the help of this digital asset management system called Dominion. This system enables us to manage our media objects into a catalog, like a sort of a digital album. In these catalogs, we are able to easily sort and access the media objects with all its properties. The system enables us to categorize our media and feed in keywords and tags and everything else for good searchability. So currently, we are developing thematic curations from existing master catalogs, which have been prior digitized, by some of our senior team members. They are like thankfully present here. Doris, she is right here joining us for the presentation. So there has been a long time already spent, 3 to 4 years, kind of digitizing the collected audiovisual artifacts, and another 10 to 15 years prior to that, where people were contributing their media, like lots of photographs, old DV tapes, and VHS tapes, high-8, even 35mm film. So great deal of work and effort has already gone into sorting material and digitizing it. And right now where I am at, along with the rest of my team, is at a stage where with the digitized material, let us take a step forward and use this or cast this digitized material into an interactive kind of a system whereby the community members can access it and interact with it, and in return also contribute their insights and views, which will enrich a perception of the community and an understanding of the community better. So that is the stage where we are in right now, and trying to activate that stage right now, slowly, step by step. So on one hand, we invite the community members to curate the recorded memories. On the other hand, the digital archives team will continue to curate and publish catalogs from our side, which is what we are doing right now. So this is an example of one thematic curation, like last school, the School of Auroville. So this is what we are developing, one of the thing. So you see the curated catalog has over 120 media objects. Each media object is well categorized and tagged with its properties, descriptions, etc. It's over here, the system. I will actually also get into a Dominion, one of catalogs. I'll give a demo right now. So this is the examples of properties associated with the media objects, like title, description, people, event, keywords, categories, authors, copyrights, and image details. It's over here. So these are some more images. The catalogs can take in most formats. In a single catalog, we can have videos, stills, as well as Word documents and PDFs. With every thematic catalog, we make it a point to add the work document with details of description, history, and memory associated with the catalog. So this is another example of a thematic curation, Fraternity, the first business unit of Auroville. So what I will do right now is I will just kind of share the screen. 1 minute. I will share the catalog right now. 1 second. So you see, this is an example of a catalog which we are working right now. So right now, so I'm searching right now fraternity over here. So fraternity is the first business unit of Orwell over here. And these are the images associated with it. I can kind of enlarge a bit. So these are some of the images. I can open the tags here. These are the properties. These are some of the tags. I can sort them by categories over here. I can sort them by keywords. I can sort them, yeah. So supposing I'm selecting this particular picture, then I have already the information associated with over here in the property. So there is this fraternity workshop by Popo and the other information I can keep moving here and the information is there along with. So each catalog actually can be accessed on web. So once it's online, then it can be embedded into our WordPress website, which we are trying to develop. So these are the various images that we are working with, and the information is there along with. And it's continuous feeding of information which is going on. So yeah, I move on. So this is roughly the thing. So this is broadly, what we are working at. And there is also this is another example of contribution from community members. Say, for example, Doris has contributed, she designed a virtual gallery and she's contributed as an artifact to the archive. So here is the Vimeo link. I can share also with the chat box and we can kind of go there. So this is the Vimeo link. So this is, say, the gallery that she's kind of worked out, and this becomes a media artifact. So it's an example of contribution from the community members that enriches the archive.
Richa, would you want to make it full screen, the video?
Sorry, please. So it also has audio clips, like interview of people in this community. Brian Walton towards the end. And there's information. Yeah, there it is.
Thank you, Richa, so much. I would urge the audience to start typing their questions now so we can start the Q&A. We have about 30 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Then maybe let me start with a question. What struck me in all the 5 presentations and what I was saying soon after Johan's presentation is there seems to be almost this idea of how do I escape death? How do we want to continue to live? And yet, Johan, in that beautiful biography of the poster you read, it says all things are impermanent. And I feel that archive is a place, as a site which brings this paradox together of how do we stay alive and yet all things are impermanent. And really starting from your project, Avantika, which was really quite emotional even for me, about the death of your grandfather and how you access it, and yet the impermanence of us as archivists, and even the archive as an impermanent site. So any thoughts on that from the five of you?
I think in my particular project, what I've realized is that with death and healing, like my grandfather's death was never grieved enough, and it kept on living in form of stories which people would tell. Either it would be my grandmother, neighbors, relatives. My father, who today when he saw the presentation came up to me in the break and said that, where did you get that voice recording of mine? When did we have that conversation? So I think the impermanence of death is so strong that it continues to live in our everyday lives, and it comes across in forms of what conversations we have. And that comes across, like in my project, I've sort of learned the healing and the grieving only through stories. So yeah.
Others, any thoughts? Yeah.
If I may add very briefly, I mean, I also see a difference because for most of the others, the projects are very personal. They are linked to the family, whereas for me, it's a collection that wasn't so personal, but in the process of archiving and digitizing, these posters have become very personal because they do have names, they have addresses, their dates of birth. And this very flimsy piece of paper can sometimes take you to wonder who was the person who came and gave the announcement. What did this mean when they saw it pasted on the wall? And that sometimes, as archivists, sometimes we don't think that we also need self-care. We need to also think how these traumas of death, I mean, it's all around us, but how do we deal with it as archivists is something that I've been thinking about. And it's really also, for me, it's also been a creative process because death is a creative process as well. I mean, I didn't expect that my archival project would be focused so much on the fact of loss, but somehow it all comes back to that there is creativity in loss as well. And I mean, it sounds very metaphysical and metaphoric, but I mean, that's been the joy as well of being working with this material.
I think there's one thing when you talk about impermanence, there is one quote from one of the senior Orwellians that keeps coming to mind. I share that quote, you know, Miss Constance, and he says, I have always seen Orwell as arriving from the future rather than being of the past. If possible, I would prefer that our record keeping be a countdown to eternity, like the steps from eternity, rather than a count up from 1968. So when the life of the city is issuing from the future, which one feels more real, the youngest among them can be considered as closest to the source, and one wants to ask the newly arrived from the future and home. So this works, I mean, in the sense that then we are not talking about impermanence or permanence, or we are not talking about death or life, but we are talking about a constant movement towards this destiny. When we are talking about constant motion towards the future, which is actually, which is where we are. So there is dynamic, then there is no stagnation in the archive, but a sort of a dynamic, and it keeps evolving with you as a human being, and as somebody who is anchored in that space or in that which is being archived. So there is movement actually constantly. So then, yeah. So I think.
Thank you. Any Ishita has a question. Ishita says, sorry, Arish, sorry, go on.
You know, I was like, in fact, like impermanence to me, it's a kind of thing. I think it's what would be the best way to revisit. In fact, like some kind of knowledge, some kind of data, some kind of information which is there, lying there, but somehow, because in our busy lives we don't get time to look at, you know, like few things which we think, right, okay, they are not there. But I think like it's paying homage, literally, to something you feel important, to talk about. And then, of course, life goes on. But somehow I think like the archives, through archives, in fact, like, and I think one can learn, and one can unfold many kind of unidirectional knowledge pools. As I said earlier on, that like it initiates more knowledge, it initiates more questions, it imposes more. So, in fact, like so it's ever evolving.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I thought about that.
Thank you. Ishita's question, as you can read, saying that all your projects are giving an identity, be it reviving the unknown or reactivation or completely new imagery of persons. How did your process get affected by the sense of responsibility?
Oh, sorry, I'm just taking this up because I suddenly remembered the first day when the workshop had begun, and Ishita pointed it out that it would be difficult for you to, not be biased in the project. And we'll have to see how that works out. And I remember after that workshop, I was really thinking about it, that how do I remove my own biases and the way I have known my grandfather. But also in the process of another workshop where I learned that it's my story. It's like I'm carrying the story with me, and do I really need to? I mean, like my bias is part of the story. So that pressure really calmed me down, and now I look at this archive like something I'm carrying with me, and hence don't get so much impacted by the bias. I'm sure it does come in picture, but yeah, it doesn't stop the process of it.
And I was about to say that, like, in fact, like, of course, somehow giving an identity is, to me, is branding something, when it's like I think slightly different than that. I would say, because if I, to me, in fact, like if I brand something, then I would force myself and others to look at that project, that very project, or the knowledge pool in one of the directions. In fact, like somehow then it would lose the quality of kind of multidisciplinary and multi-directional approach to that. So in fact, like when it comes to responsibility, of course, you have to be responsible, somehow whatever you are saying and whatever you're putting through. So I believe that in this process, in fact, like I learned that, citation is one of the best processes, because if you cite it properly and then you take care of everyone's perspective, because it is never going to be like a unidirectional thing.
Okay.
It will be assessed. It will be taken from one's own perspective always, and there would be more to evolve. There would be more to come, and as you engage, as you present your project to someone, there would be few more, in fact, like investigations. There would be more kind of questions to it. Go on.
No, sorry, I was also looking at Mavish's question, which I think is a rather sharp question also, and something that perplexes all of us as artists who work with archives. She's asking, yesterday we talked about how archives stop being an art, or if there is a distinction, where is the line? My question is, how did your project tackle with the question of the archive and research, for instance? Which sources to follow, or if not, then where do you only look at it as an object or gather information and remove the added load of information? So Mavish, if I've understood this, are you asking us where is the distinction between an art object and an archival object? Is that the question, the first part of the question? And the second part is, where do you look for information on the object?
I was like yesterday, we actually looked into the idea or sort of had a discussion about when an archive becomes an art object or whether there's a distinction. But I was interested, because all of these projects that were presented today had a lot of information attached to it. So my question is, was this that when an object only remains an object, and when there is a pool of information attached to it, so which side are we picking, and how are we actually resolving which side to pick? And when there is so much added information on the object, and when does it stop being that object, but rather become, that it's taking, yalla from this information, then some from this, and then some from this. So that was my question.
Yeah,
if there is a line.
Question. Yeah. Johan, Richa, Niharika, are you still with us?
I can answer very briefly. Just a thought that went through my head is I started with the premise that archives will never be complete, and that the archivist should not take the responsibility to make it complete either. I mean, we are in a process of helping people gather information, making it accessible for people in the future to come as close as possible to what may be the truth, but there is no such thing as that. And I mean, as you saw in what it was a creative process of imagination, of research. I mean, some of it was actually grounded in research and anecdotes. But the fact that I didn't have to choose also gave me some freedom. I didn't feel constrained that the archives is very scientific. Of course, we do look at scientific processes of being accurate, of sources and all of that. But I wasn't bound by that. I was bound by the respect and responsibility to the objects, but I wasn't constricted, is what I would like to say. Yeah.
And I just have an add-on question to everybody else as well, as an attachment to Mavish's question. Then what happens as archivists or as interveners to the politics of interpretation? Because we're constantly interpreting an object that we find, right? So is there a politics involved in that interpretation of that object or even the information?
Undoubtedly, there is politics involved. There is no doubt about it. So you cannot not have, But then the question links to Ishita's question. How do you identify that politics, and your relationship with that politics? So which means you have to be very clear about what is your politics as a human being and as so otherwise then, because your archive will borrow from that politics whether you want it to happen or not. Unconsciously your archive will end up borrowing from your politics. So then I think the question comes of identity, that what is your identity, the way you perceive, and what is the identity of the archival materials that you connect, or how do you identify those things? What do you identify in them? I brings us to Mahevish. So if I have to answer for myself, I think for me the biggest thing, identifier, what matters, pool of information, was the spirit. And at some level, other than the superficial information, like the tangible information that comes with the image, like and source, or who shot it, where was it shot, why was it shot. Other than all these things, the one major question was that what was the spirit that I could identify with it, what was the energy of the media, and how could I identify with it, in addition to all metadata that comes with it, but were able to identify with and connect with the spirit that the media object holds. And then, so can that spirit talk to you, and can your archive transport or transfer rather, can you as an archivist enable that transference?
Sorry, that really resonates with my kind of thinking as well, in terms of how do we capture this spirit of the object, and what role can we play in facilitating this? But sorry to cut you.
And I have a question related to this idea of the spirit, Richard, that's actually really philosophical what you're saying, because we talk so much about objects And often in archival conversations or in museum conversations, we talk about found objects. And I've worked with enough artists, and it struck me in Niharika's presentation that she says the objects found her as well. And this is also in the spirit of something finding somebody. The stories find us. As archivists, we go seeking. But I made a note because she said, Niharika said, finding and being found. So the objects almost find their way to you. I find that incredibly powerful as an idea connected to the idea of the spirit. Niharika, would you like to come in on that, of being found by your objects?
That's a good observation, Anuja, and I was coming to that actually. So, I wanted to talk about Ishita's question actually about identity. Well, in this case, for Dadi's case especially, it was more of claiming an identity beyond that of a wife, but as an artist of equal right. And somewhere Avantika said that the bias does come in, and my bias as a woman possibly did come in highlighting of her being a woman, being a wife or a homemaker. So that is, and I was at several moments I was conscious of that bias coming in. I don't know what to do with it, but it's there, and I'm aware of it. Stories finding me. Yeah,
sorry?
Yeah.
Go on, Niharika, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, and about objects finding me, I have realized the alchemy of these objects finding you and coming to you exactly when you need to see them. It could be in front of you and you would probably not notice it. It just happened with Dayanita ji. She mentioned that I had missed this quote in Zakir Hussain's maquette. I had gone through it several times in the past, but I didn't realize back then that this would be my scope and I would this process of archiving. And she sent me a picture of the photo book on Zakir Hussain, and there his quote is. I'll send it to you. And it found me with me.
So an object found you as we were speaking today, or information found you. Any questions from the audience? I would really like to, open it up. And if you have questions for each other, we have about 10 minutes.
Can I respond to Niharika's sense of bias?
Yes, please. Who's speaking though? It would be nice.
Richa.
Yes. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to respond to Niharika that you said that you don't know how to deal with this bias. Can you just share how I dealt with it? One is my bias. So the way I dealt with it is I just completely acknowledged it. That it exists. My bigger question is how to deal with the biases of others. That is what I am not able to follow, because that it's easier to deal with your bias because you can somehow come to terms with it, but how to come to terms with bias of other people, who have equal say and control or over the archive, especially it's a community archive. Then how do you deal with each other's biases? Because they reflect on the archive that we are trying to build it. Perhaps not in the context of personal archive, but in other institutional archives or community archives. So that's the question that I'm not being able to resolve yet, because there are choices that certain people make, which I necessarily will not make, but being a community or where there is no clear hierarchy as in case of institution, then it's an endless merry-go-round.
That's a very important thing you're flagging, Richa. Johan, do you have any ideas? You work with a collective as well, right? And does that collective also engages in archives? Is it right in understanding that?
No, they're still new to the idea of archiving and presenting. So I'm the one who actually got them interested in the concept. I mean, they had the original concept. There is something called archiving, but I'm the one who actually took the first step. It's a bit different.
Audience questions to anybody, to anything, any other questions for each other would be wonderful to hear. I mean, if nobody, there. Hi, Emily. So nice to see you here. So Emily's a friend and an artist, and she says, how do the speakers manage the size and scope of archives? They can be endless, I imagine. So do you need to put frameworks of limitation in place? Or does the digital space allow them to grow exponentially? And I think Emily is here as well. So yeah, how do you put a limitation on your scope? How do you create a framework, if you will, of when do you stop? Is it endless? How does one decide that?
Well, I have a very practical answer to that. If we do our basic categorization well, no, then it's very possible. Then the scope can be endless. I mean, the material can be endless. Your categories are so well defined. So if you do your groundwork in terms of classification, I mean, that has experience. Then you create those little rooms, and then you can keep expanding those rooms as the material expands. But you have understood the scope of the material that can potentially come to you. So you have understood the scope of the nature of the archive in the initial stage of its development, which you do your categorization and classification. So if that ground is set properly, then I think archives can really grow without much of an issue. It's just a matter of adding blocks to those spaces, but the spaces in the structure is made. I think so. Because right now we are dealing with Auroville archives, so especially with it's a huge thing. What is behind us is as daunting as what is there ahead of us. Especially, so it's crazy. But then it resolves the moment I resolve the categories.
But also another question that is a follow-up is the work of the archive ever complete? Is the archive ever as a site complete? And that was initially my question about death and impermanence. The archive as a site, if one were to imagine it philosophically, can that finish? Can that end? But I think this is a very practical question that Emily has asked. And that's open still to anybody. Johan, Niharika.
Yeah, just one thought on that.
Yes, go ahead, Johan. Yeah. Sorry?
Yeah, so everyone tells you before you start an archiving.
Yeah, go ahead, Johan.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So everyone warns you before starting an archiving project that you have to find your scope, but it's only when you actually practically go into the work that you realize that even if you have 100 objects that can be seen in many different ways, you can look at one poster and see it from 5 ways, 10 ways, it just keeps on growing. So the fact that you have to set boundaries at some level, and nothing really prepares you for that.
And how do you set the boundaries? Do you just decide that, how do you go about doing it? Is what
I mean, archivists look at the fonts level, right, and the different categories. So if you set a very broad categorization and you focus on one, that I guess you can always keep adding to those categories. Is how I decide to go about it.
Yes, Arish, you were saying.
Yeah, I was about to say that it all depends on the genre of the archive. In fact, because when I worked with, in fact, let me put some examples here. When I worked with Autograph ABP in London, right? They had a few hundred photographs which were never, in fact, developed, and they were hidden at Hilton Archives. So for 100 years, more than 100 years, and then a researcher came at Frankfurt, and then they scanned it, right? And they all of those photographs were printed. But then at the end of the day, there were 200 photographs only, right? But what I learned through that project, that it's all about user experience. It's all about how you put all these archives for people to experiment with. Whether you just whether you allow people to be engaged in a blog format, like you allow people to leave comments on your a photograph you posted, or same as a Facebook or other Twitter and other social media, and in fact platform, and then to allow people to a few questions to be asked. In fact, so only then, and then responses must be recorded. Only then I think like an archive can grow exponentially without any like borders, without any sort of bifurcations. They will grow, and a digital space is the best space to do that. And the other sort thing, in fact, like somehow a published book, I would say, would in fact like it would ask you to revisit, redo the edition, and then reprint it. So somehow, I think it's all that about like dynamically designed archive, which will grow, and it should grow,
right?
Because it is for people.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Ishita has a response for Richa, I think.
Yeah, so I have two responses actually. Just to add to Arish's and Emily's question, both will grow. So not just the digital space. I know it sounds easier, but the physical also grows. And that is why the archive needs to be seen as a space with dotted lines, as a boundary and not a closed black line. That's what an archive is. I mean, you might have a nucleus which is maybe a little tighter, but the periphery is always going to stretch and come in and out, physical or digital. And with that same logic, I think I was just pondering over, and it took me some time. But Richa, the question you asked is, I think, very critical to community archiving, because I think that sets the premise why you're doing community archiving. So when we move from the personal archiving to a community archiving space, I think there is, perhaps I'm talking about my practice and somebody can contest me, but I think we are allowing for more biases to seep in. That is what would mean a community archive, that I'm accepting that if my bias is allowed, then so is another 50 people's bias. And hence, the framework changes, and hence that archive would allow for those biases to be represented, at least in the project that we have done. And let the researcher make their call, however now messy and convoluting it might feel or mean. So that's what I've been thinking about your question.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. It really makes a lot of sense, but it really calls for a lot of courage and cooperation.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
I think we're almost out of time. Any closing questions, or shall I wrap it up? Any closing thoughts? Okay, so I just want to close by two small ideas that frame this conversation and these presentations. So first of all, thank you very much for all of you sharing. Two very important, please contribute to the compendium. It's very important. It's on Keto, so that's the critical thing. And, just to work through the complexity of what archives can be, life, death, I really also want to come back to poetry and want to really leave with this thought of, we and you guys in the last many months have carried a tiny bit of the archival story with you. And it says, you who carried or told a tiny bit of it aren't sure. Is this what we wanted? Our stories wandering out, having their own free lives. So I really hope that these archives that we are creating will wander out and have their own free lives. And the stories they tell will change. As Della Pollock says in Oral History and Performance, she says, a story is not a story until it is told. It is not told until it is heard. Once it is heard, it changes. A story is not a story until it changes.
Many thanks to Anuja and all the participants for this session. A big thank you to all of you in the audience. If you're joining us for the next session, please meet us on the second link at 8 p.m. sharp. And we are sharing the crowdfunding link in the chat, so do spread the word. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, and a big round of applause to all of you. It's amazing work.
Bye. Bye, guys. See you in the next meeting.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.